Not every figure who spread terror throughout history sat on a throne. Not every blood-stained hand ever held a scepter. There were people who never wore a crown, never declared themselves divine, yet stood behind almost every decision that crushed tens of thousands of lives. There were names never carved into monuments, never sung in epics, never recorded in humanity's chronicles. And yet those names were the true foundation of tyranny. History often tells us about kings, about pharaohs walking through gold-covered palaces, bowed to by thousands, proclaimed as lords of the earth. But history rarely stops to ask a deeper question. Who convinced a man that he had the right to stand on equal footing with God? Who transformed arrogance into order, into law, into stone and brick, even into a system heavy enough to crush the soul of an entire people? There was such a man, one who never needed to stand in the spotlight, one who only needed to stand behind the throne, close enough to whisper, deep enough to guide, cold enough to turn madness into policy and illusion into reality. His name was Haman. What is strange is this. If you search for Haman in human history, you will not find him, not in the Torah, not in the Gospels, not in the surviving records of ancient Egypt. His name was erased, as if he had never existed. But there is one place that did not forget, one source that mentions him, not once, but repeatedly, the Qur'an. Allah does not preserve names because they deserve praise. Allah preserves names because they demand warning. And when the Qur'an speaks of Haman, it is not as a minor detail in the story of Pharaoh. It is a deeper, colder, more terrifying message. Because Haman was not the one who openly claimed to be God. He was the one who made that claim stand. In a world where power was worshipped like a deity, Haman did not rule by the sword. He ruled by structure, by arrangement, by systems that trained people to bow so long they forgot they were ever meant to stand upright. When Pharaoh walked through golden halls, it was not just the stride of a tyrant. It was the result of countless calculated decisions behind the scenes, countless fears engineered with intent, and countless lives treated as raw material for one man's glory. Haman did not need to shout commands of death. He only needed to make death feel normal, when forced labor became duty, when suffering became expected, and when people stopped asking why they endured pain and only asked how to survive one more day. That was the moment Haman's power reached its peak. Quiet, uncelebrated, but relentless and cruel. And then, within a system that seemed unshakable, something no one expected happened. A man returned to the palace he once fled as a fugitive. He brought no army. He carried no weapons. He carried only one message. Absolute power does not belong to Pharaoh, and there is one above every throne. The arrival of Musa, peace be upon him, was not only a challenge to Pharaoh. It was a crack in the entire structure Haman had spent years building. For the first time, tyranny was threatened not by rebellion or war, but by truth. And in that moment, Haman's true role began to surface, not as an executor, but as a guardian of illusion. He's a man who would do anything to keep the throne from collapsing, even if that meant distorting truth and turning light itself into a threat. Before this story goes any further, welcome to Prophetic History Explained. This is not only a place where ancient stories are retold. It is a place where we confront lessons that are still alive, still repeating, still quietly shaping the world today. If you feel the weight of this story, if you are curious why a man erased from history is preserved in the Quran as a warning for every generation, subscribe to Prophetic History Explained. Your support is what allows stories like this to continue being told, explored, and used to illuminate the dark corners human history often ignores. Because Haman's story does not begin with death, it begins with a role. And if we do not understand that role, then we will never understand why his ending is carved so deeply into Revelation. The most dangerous form of power is not the power that kills. It is the power that decides what counts as truth. When truth is distorted, people no longer realize they are oppressed. They only know that they are afraid. And Haman understood this better than anyone in the Egyptian court. When Musa entered the Great Hall with the message of Tawheed, the atmosphere shifted before any miracle appeared. The challenge was not the staff or the glowing hand. It was a single sentence powerful enough to shake every foundation. Pharaoh is not God. In that moment, the entire order Haman had built stood on the edge of collapse. Not because the army weakened, not because the people revolted, but because truth had been spoken at the center of power. Pharaoh heard it, and for a brief instant, even a man who claimed divinity wavered. But Haman would not allow that hesitation to linger. Because if truth is heard long enough, it begins to take root, and Haman's task was not to refute truth, but to stop it from reaching human hearts. He did not confront Musa with violence. He did not rally soldiers. He did something far more subtle. He redefined the story. Miracles were not denied, they were renamed. Light was not extinguished, it was labeled deception. Musa was not framed as a messenger, but as a destabilizer. And when the story was told that way, the crowd began to fear, not because Musa was wrong, but because they were taught that truth itself was dangerous. This is how power survives for generations. It does not need to torture everyone, and it only needs people to doubt their ability to tell right from wrong. Haman did not build tyranny with whips. He built it with language, with whispers, with phrases repeated until they sounded obvious. When a society begins to believe that truth is a threat, prisons become unnecessary. People imprison themselves in fear. Musa stood before the palace with the calm of someone who did not need to protect his reputation. He did not compete for power. He did not call for rebellion. He simply called people back to Allah. And that simplicity terrified Haman more than any miracle, because nothing is more dangerous than a truth that needs no weapon to exist. And so Haman launched a war history rarely records. A war for control over perception. In palace corridors, in the whispers of officials, in the fear spreading through the population, and a new message was planted. Musa did not come to liberate. Musa came to seize power. Musa did not bring light. Musa brought chaos. And when words are repeated often enough, even those who witnessed miracles with their own eyes began to hesitate. Not because they did not see, but because they no longer trusted themselves to know what to believe. Haman understood that tyranny does not fall when it is exposed. It falls when people stop believing in it. To prevent that, truth had to be made suspicious, light had to be covered in doubt. People had to feel safer bowing to lies than standing upright before truth. Here, the line between the tyrant and the one behind the tyrant becomes clear. Pharaoh needed worship. Haman needed trust. Pharaoh needed fear. Haman needed consent. And when those two forces combined, tyranny stopped being a person, and it became a living system that protected itself by distorting anything that threatened its survival. Each time Musa returned with a new sign, the same battle resumed. Not between miracles and magic, but between truth and the way truth was told. Some hearts softened when they sensed the light. Others, shaped by carefully crafted words, began to hate the very thing that could save them. And Haman watched with cold satisfaction, knowing he was winning, at least in people's minds. Because when power controls the story, it does not need to win reality. Winning perception is enough. That is why, despite undeniable signs, tyranny stood a little longer. Not because Allah lacked the power to end it instantly, but because people still had a choice, to believe truth or to believe the story told to them. And Haman wagered everything on people choosing wrong. There came a moment in history when power stopped trying to persuade with words and began to persuade with shape. When truth could no longer be distorted, it was mocked. When light could not be fully hidden, it was challenged with symbols. That was the moment the command to build the tower was given, not as a sudden act of madness, but as the final conclusion of a mindset that had exhausted humility. Pharaoh did not ask to debate Musa. He did not seek answers. He wanted a spectacle, a structure massive enough to crush truth beneath the weight of matter. And Haman understood immediately. This was not the time to argue or repress. This was the time to turn denial into architecture, to freeze arrogance into stone, to show an entire nation how high human power could rise. And the tower was not built to search for Allah. It was built to declare that Allah did not need to be sought. It was not a bridge between earth and sky. It was a wall erected between people and truth. In every brick, in every layer of fired clay lived a dangerous belief that human fire could replace revealed light, that what is forged by hands and strength could stand equal to what comes from the unseen. Haman did not see the tower as an engineering project. He saw it as a message, a declaration sent to Musa, to the people, and to the heavens themselves. Each day the tower rose higher, not because Allah was farther away, but because arrogance ran deeper. Each stacked layer of brick did not bring people closer to truth, but pushed them farther from humility. The furnaces burned day and night, hardening more than clay. They hardened hearts. Laborers hauled heavy mud in silence, not because they believed in the project, but because they were taught there was no alternative. Pain became routine. Exhaustion became duty. From a distance, the tower was not just a column of red brick in the desert. It was the condensation of thousands of lives treated as disposable material. Pharaoh watched it rise and believed he was winning. He believed every additional foot of height was a denial aimed at Musa. But Haman, who understood power better than anyone, knew the victory was not in reaching the sky. It was in making people believe the sky could be challenged, that there were no limits except those humans imposed on themselves. When that belief spread, tyranny no longer needed to claim divinity. It was divinized in people's minds. The tower became a ritual, a collective ritual of denial. In it told workers their suffering had meaning. It told observers that this power was untouchable. And it told Musa that his truth could be mocked with brick and clay. But that was arrogance's greatest illusion. No structure ever built to defeat truth fails to become evidence of its own misguidance. Throughout human history, such towers have risen many times. Not always of brick, not always in deserts. Some were built of ideas, of systems, of stories repeated until people forgot what they were standing on. But their essence is always the same. They do not rise to seek the heavens. They rise to challenge them. Haman believed that by giving denial a physical form, he had sealed the door to truth. What he did not realize was that every brick was also testimony, not to human strength, but to the fear buried in the heart of one who cannot bow. And only those who fear truth need to build something to fight it. The tower kept rising along with the illusion that this power could last forever. But arrogance always makes the same mistake. It believes shape can replace meaning, that height can replace correctness, that the noise of hammers can drown out conscience. And in that mistake, Haman's fate was already sealed, not in stone, but in the order of truth no structure can break. Not every sign is sent to save. Some are sent to expose. When people face light again and again, yet still turn away, that light stops being an invitation. It becomes a verdict. Haman's collapse began there long before the sea closed, long before an empire vanished from the earth. Allah's signs did not come once. They came repeatedly, patiently, as if the door had not yet fully closed. Musa returned to the palace not in anger, but with patience even enemies could not comprehend. He did not alter his message. He did not add anything new. He did not soften truth to make it easier to swallow. He simply repeated the call. Return. Stop. Remember that this power does not belong to you. Some hearts trembled when they heard it, not from fear of Musa, but from fear of the truth touching something deep inside. Servants of Pharaoh, people raised in tyranny's shadow, began to look inward. Even the magicians, once defenders of the throne, fell to their knees when they witnessed the signs. They did not bow to Musa. They bowed to undeniable truth. That moment revealed something frightening. Not everyone is blind to light. But Haman was different. While others softened, his heart hardened. Where others saw hope, he saw threat. Each sign did not shake him, but strengthened his hatred. Because for Haman, the question was never whether Allah existed. The question was that if Allah existed, everything he had built would collapse. And so he forbade himself belief, forbade hesitation, forbade even the smallest crack in the armor of arrogance wrapped around his heart. The Quran describes such hearts with a terrifying image, harder than stone. Stone can split when water flows through it, but some hearts, even when watered by signs, even when awakened by warnings, do not move. Not because Allah lacks the power to soften them, but because people lock the door from the inside. Haman no longer reacted to signs as someone choosing. He reacted as someone who had decided long ago that he would never bow. The danger of this state is not external action, even it is internal silence, when conscience stops speaking, when fear no longer points toward truth but toward protecting the ego. Haman no longer heard Musa as a warning. He heard him as an insult. From that moment, every sign was inverted. What was sent to save became the enemy. The plagues did not come to punish immediately, but to open final chances to return. Each time, Haman chose differently. He did not see an invitation. He saw a threat to his position. When people whispered about Musa, he saw betrayal. When obedience turned into questions, he saw danger. And instead of self-examination, he reinforced the walls inside himself. This spiritual collapse was not loud. There was no thunder, no sea-splitting. It unfolded quietly in repeated small decisions, in choosing denial over humility, power over truth, control over repentance, until a person loses the ability to recognize error, not from lack of information, but from loss of listening. Haman walked palace halls, witnessing upheaval, but inside him nothing moved. That is the most dangerous state a human can reach. When signs no longer awaken, but only thicken darkness. When light does not enter, but reflects back as anger. The Quran makes it clear. Some people are destroyed not because they never saw truth, but because they saw it too many times and still turned away. Once a heart turns to stone, everything that follows is merely form. The Red Sea will close, but the verdict was written long before. Haman's collapse did not begin at the final moment. It was complete the moment he decided no sign would ever make him stop. Some people disappear from history not because they were small, but because disappearance itself is the sentence. When tyranny falls, not every name is dragged down with it. Some names dissolve with thrones and monuments. Others are erased so completely they leave no trace, as if they never existed. Haman is such a name. After the Red Sea, no statues were built for him, no inscriptions, no achievements recorded by later dynasties. Human history moved on, leaving Haman behind in silence. Not because he lacked power, but because his power left nothing worth remembering. The structures he built carried no name. The systems he upheld collapsed with the one he served. Time buried everything and history fell silent, as if to say that some people only need to be forgotten. But revelation does not remain silent. The Quran does not attempt to fill historical gaps, and it does not write to complete human chronicles. It selects. And that selection is what makes Haman terrifying. Allah does not mention him to recount the past, but to illuminate the present and warn the future. Haman appears not as a side character, but as a symbol. the symbol of behind-the-scenes power, of intelligence bent to serve arrogance, of a person who believes that not wearing a crown absolves him of responsibility. History may forget Haman because history is written by victors. Revelation does not depend on victory or defeat. Revelation depends on truth, and the truth preserved by the Quran is clear. Tyranny does not survive because of one man. It survives because of those willing to turn lies into order, oppression into normality, and submission into habit. Haman is remembered not for who he was, but for the role he represents, in a role that keeps returning. In every era, when someone rises to claim absolute power, there are always others behind them, never claiming divinity, yet doing everything to protect false divinity. They do not need blatant lies. They only need to shape how people understand truth. They do not need violence. They only need people to fear asking questions. That is why this story does not end at the Red Sea. The sea was only the final form of a verdict written long before, when hearts reject every sign, when intellect is used to justify wrong, when power is placed above truth, when people believe they can stand behind without bearing responsibility for what they enable. The Quran mentions Haman to remind us that no position lies outside justice. There are no minor roles in wrongdoing. No one standing behind is exempt. No system is sophisticated enough to hide truth forever. History may be slow. Revelation is precise. There is a deeper lesson here for those who listen not as to distant myth, but as to a mirror. The greatest danger is not the one who loudly claims correctness, but the one who knows he is wrong and continues anyway. For benefit, power, and position. The greatest collapse of a person does not occur at punishment, but when they lose the ability to recognize their need for salvation. Haman did not die by the sea. He died earlier when humility was sealed out of his heart. That is why Allah did not allow his name to disappear entirely, not for remembrance, but for prevention. When history falls silent, revelation speaks. When monuments collapse, lessons stand. And when power believes it has won by erasing a name, Allah reminds us that recording a name in the right place is enough to expose an entire age. The deepest lesson of this story is simple. No one is outside moral responsibility simply because they are not in charge. There are no supporting roles in oppression. When we use intellect to legitimize wrong, when we stay silent before injustice because it benefits us, when we distort truth to protect a corrupt system, we take the first steps down Haman's path. Applying this lesson today demands painful honesty. It forces us to ask where we stand in our work, in society, and relationships. Are we speaking truth or telling a convenient story? Are we using our abilities to protect what is right or to make wrong seem acceptable? The crisis of our age is not lack of information. It is lack of courage to stand with truth when it costs us. And if these questions weigh on you, if you want to continue exploring Quranic stories not as history alone but as mirrors for today, join the Prophetic History Explained community. Together we explore prophetic narratives, figures preserved in Revelation, and lessons still urgent for the modern world. And if you found value here, subscribe to Prophetic History Explained to support our work. Your presence is what allows this channel to continue telling stories that are deeper, more honest, and more necessary in the videos ahead.